It was the first week of June, the grass still wet against my knees at 8 in the morning, and I was crouched at the tree line behind my own house, pulling something off a 2-year-old who was not even mine to be pulling things off of. Her mother was inside on the phone with a nurse line, and I was the one who knew what to do, because I grew up knowing what to do, in a place where nobody ever called an exterminator to begin with. There was a chipped white enamel bucket sitting by my porch steps that morning, the blue rim worn down to bare metal in a few spots, and I did not think twice about it. It was just where I kept the mix. I want you to remember that bucket, because I am going to come back to it. By the end of that first summer, we had counted 72 ticks in a single mason jar, off 2 dogs and 1 fence line. And not one, not a single one, off either child in that house. I am not going to explain that number yet. Sit with it. Stay with me to the end, because before this is over, I am going to give you the exact ratio my grandmother used behind her own wash house in Holmes County. A ratio I have never once seen printed in a book, in a magazine, or in anyone's blog. And I checked before I said that out loud on camera. And here is something smaller, something I am not going to answer for you. I still wonder, when you found the last one, on yourself or on your own child, whether you knew what to do in the first 30 seconds, before you even reached for the tweezers. But before I tell you what went into that bucket, you need to understand why nobody in the community I grew up in ever signed a contract with a lawn company in the first place. Give me one more minute here. Tell me in the comments the exact spot on your body where you found your worst one. I mean the exact spot, not the general area, the exact spot. Because I read every single comment and I will bet you it is the back of the knee more often than anywhere else. And I am going to say something now that might make a few of you angry. The tick problem in your yard was never really a bad luck problem. It is a lawn maintenance problem, and it has been priced that way on purpose since long before this year's outbreak made the news. Same yard, same spray schedule, every 6 weeks since April. Same $600 gone by Labor Day. And somehow you are still finding them in July, still checking your own children's hairlines by flashlight, still not sure if the spray is doing anything at all beyond making the grass smell like a hospital hallway for 2 days. There is no money in telling a homeowner to plant something along a fence line once and be done with it, so nobody in that industry tells you that. Instead, they sell you a seasonal contract for a problem that, until very recently, most of this country did not even have to think about. Emergency rooms this spring saw tick bite visits climb well over 25% in a single month compared to the year before, the sharpest jump in nearly a decade. And counties in Ohio, Kentucky, West Virginia, Indiana and Illinois are now showing up on maps that used to be blank. That is not a rumor passed around at a produce auction. That is a public health briefing. And still, the advice handed to most families is the same 6-treatment contract that existed before any of this changed. You already know the routine, and somewhere in the back of your mind, you have to ask yourself whether there is another way to do this. One that does not involve a truck idling in your driveway every few weeks and a sign stuck in the yard telling the neighbours to keep their dog off your lawn for 24 hours. When was the last time you actually read what was on that sign before you let your kids back onto the grass? I'll tell you exactly what changed my mind about spray and why I stopped trusting the whole arrangement in just a minute. The woman who taught me this was named Suse Yoder, and by the time I went back to see her, she was well into her 80s, living alone on a farm about 11 miles down a gravel road from where I grew up. I drove out there on a Saturday specifically to see the card box she kept on top of her icebox. A small tin box with a hinged lid, rusted a little at the corners, holding maybe 40 recipe cards, written in a hand so tight and small, you had to hold them up to the window to read them. The card I wanted smelled like cedar before I even opened the box. That sharp, almost peppery smell that gets into the grain of old wood and never leaves. Suse pulled it out without looking, because she did not need to look, and told me the ratio the way you'd recite an address you've known your whole life. I will admit something here. I stood in her kitchen for a full minute, not quite believing what she was telling me, because it sounded too simple to actually be the whole answer. I kept waiting for the rest of it, the part where she'd mention a second ingredient, a special month, something I was missing. There wasn't one. She just looked at me like I was the one being difficult. Have you ever had someone hand you the simple version of something and you refused to believe it was really that simple? What does that say about the rest of what we've been sold? I did not fully believe her until I went home and tried it myself, on my own tree line, for 1 full season, and counted. Here is the practice plainly the way Suse gave it to me. You mix 1 part cedarwood oil to 4 parts white vinegar, in a bucket, not a spray bottle at first, because you need volume for what comes next. Chemists would probably call the effect an acaricide, something that disrupts a tick's ability to sense a host through scent. Suse just called it the smell that says no. Ticks navigate almost entirely by scent and by carbon dioxide, not by sight. And there is a narrow band of odour they will not cross voluntarily, not because it harms them, but because it overwhelms the exact sense they depend on to find you. You apply it, with an old rag or a garden sprayer once you've got the mix right, along the actual tree line, not the open lawn. That distinction matters more than almost anything else in this whole process. Ticks do not drop out of trees onto your head, whatever you were told as a kid. They climb up onto tall grass and brush at the exact border where mown lawn meets wild growth. And they wait there, front legs out, for something warm to walk past. That border, sometimes 18 inches wide, sometimes 3 feet, is the only place that actually matters. I want to stop here for a second and tell you about the smell in my own yard the first week I did this properly. Vinegar has a way of hitting the back of your throat before you even see the bucket, sharp enough that your eyes water a little in the heat, and under it, once it settles, that low, warm cedar smell, almost like the inside of a cedar chest left shut all winter. My hands smelled like it for 2 days, no matter how many times I washed them. That is how you know you did it right, honestly. If you can't smell it on yourself hours later, you didn't put down enough. You reapply every 10 days through the peak months, which in most of the country now runs from April through September, longer than it used to. And heavier rain means you reapply sooner, because rain washes the barrier down the hill before it's finished its work. Now, I want to be honest with you about something. I made every one of the following mistakes myself before I understood what was wrong, and I'm not going to pretend otherwise just to look competent on camera. I sprayed only the open lawn the first year, because that's where I was used to seeing ticks reported, and left the actual tree line untouched. I mixed the ratio too weak on purpose, thinking I was being economical with the cedar oil. And a weak barrier is functionally no barrier at all. I treated once in early June and considered the job finished, when the whole method depends on repetition every 10 days straight through late summer. And once, memorably, I sprayed at 4 in the afternoon on a day it rained 6 hours later, and watched a full week of work run down the slope into the ditch before it had even dried. I have to tell you something I have not said in any other video I've made. The year I left the community, 1998, my youngest sister was bitten and went undiagnosed for almost 3 months because nobody who saw her thought to look for a tick bite on a girl who spent her whole life outdoors already, as if that made her immune instead of more exposed. She recovered eventually, fully, but I still run my fingers through my own children's hairlines every single night before bed, out of a fear I have never fully put down, and I doubt I ever will. That same chipped enamel bucket from my porch steps is what I still mix it in, all these years later, a little more dented at the bottom than it used to be. How long has it actually been since you checked the back of your own knees? Not your child's, yours. If you are the kind of person who would rather spend 20 quiet minutes with a bucket and a rag than $60 a month on a contract you have to remember to cancel, you already know what to do with this information. How many contracts are you renewing right now out of habit, not because anyone ever proved to you they were still worth it? You probably already scrolled back up once to reread the ratio. Here is something that has nothing to do with vinegar or cedar at all. In Holmes County, we used to say a good barn cat was worth more than a guard dog, not for the mice in the feed room, but because mice, far more than deer, are the animal that actually carries the early stage bacteria from tick to human in the first place. Nobody ever puts a barn cat on a public health poster about Lyme disease. I think about that more than I probably should. This is for a property with an actual tree line, a wooded edge, a fence row, somewhere brush meets open grass. It is not for a downtown lot with no natural border to treat. And it is not a cure for a bite you already have. Anyone who tells you cedar oil treats an active Lyme infection is selling you something. And I will not be the one to tell you that. If you already have a bullseye rash or a fever that will not break, that stopped being a home remedy question the moment it appeared. That is a doctor's office question. Today, not next week, not after you finish the yard work. This is not documented, and I want to be honest with you about something. Suse never once wrote down a study. She never ran a control lawn. What she had was 40 years of watching her own family's legs at the end of every summer. And mine is one household, treated one way for a handful of seasons. I am not asking you to take my word for it as though it were a clinical trial. I am telling you what worked on my own tree line, plainly, and letting you decide what that is worth on yours. Have you ever put off a doctor's visit because the thing on your skin didn't look quite bad enough yet to justify the appointment? There is good money, real money, in a spray contract renewed every spring for the rest of a homeowner's life. There is no money at all in a chipped bucket you fill once behind your own porch and refill for a few dollars each season. Which is exactly why one of those gets advertised and the other one gets taught, quietly, from one woman to another, over a tin box of recipe cards nobody photographed. I wonder sometimes how many things in your own life you are still paying a monthly bill for, that your own grandmother would have simply made once and kept. This weekend, walk your actual tree line, not your lawn, the real border where grass gives way to brush or woods, and count how many places a deer or a mouse could cross it without ever touching open ground. Come back and tell me that number. And type the word bucket in the comments if you already own something at home you could mix this in without buying a single new thing. So here is the number from the beginning, plainly. 72 ticks in one jar was the count from that first uneven summer. Before I understood the tree line mattered more than the lawn. Before I had the ratio right. before I was reapplying on schedule instead of when I remembered. The summer after I finally did it the way Suse showed me, the count off that same fence line dropped to 2. Not 0. I won't tell you 0, because that would be a lie, and I promised you the record, not a sales pitch. 2. And here, finally, plainly, one more time, is what I promised you at the start. 1 part cedarwood oil, 4 parts white vinegar. Applied along the tree line, not the lawn. Every 10 days through the season, sooner after rain. That is the whole recipe. No footnote, no fine print. As for the other thing I asked you, back at the start, about whether you knew what to do in those first 30 seconds, I never answered it, and I'm not going to now. Not every question needs an answer. Some of them just need to be honest. And that one is yours to sit with, not mine to solve for you. I still keep that same enamel bucket by my porch steps, chipped a little more at the rim every year, still smelling faintly of cedar, even empty. The tree line behind that house will tell you the truth about your yard long before any spray truck pulling into your driveway ever will.